Good morning to everybody. There were only a few papers available, but you can find this paper on the website. If you go to the conference papers, at the very bottom you will find this paper. So if you have your iPhones or your iPads, you can also access this material. I'll be reading through this paper, and I think we can make it through in the allotted time. Just for your information, for those who may not know, the word maskilim is a Hebrew word for the wise that appear in Daniel 11 and Daniel 12, and also in Daniel chapter 1. So that when I say maskilim, I'm talking about the wise. Let's begin. Introduction. For decades, Ellen White has been pleading with us to read and study the book of Revelation in conjunction with the prophecy of Daniel. One of the most important themes we find in the prophecy of Daniel is the motif of the maskilim. This paper is an intertextual study of how the book of Revelation uses this Danielic motif. The paper begins with a brief analysis of how the word maskilim is used inside the prophecy of Daniel. Then we will focus on the texts that describe the characteristics of the end-time maskilim. This is followed by an analysis of the texts in Revelation that make a strong allusion to the end-time maskilim of Daniel by either thematic or linguistic connections. In the conclusion, we will attempt to summarize the most important implications of the study. Methodology. There are several presuppositions in this study of the book of Revelation. 1, the book of Revelation complements or expands some of the themes found in the prophecy of Daniel. 2, the book of Revelation uses mainly symbolic language. 3, although the book of Revelation prophesies about historic events of the past, its main emphasis is on eschatology. 4, the book of Revelation uses allusions from the Old Testament and the New Testament to help the reader-hearer identify its cryptic symbols. 5, it is recognized that there is no scholarly consensus on the exact definition of an allusion, but there is plenty of literature that documents the importance of intertextuality in the book of Revelation. And finally, the best way to compare the Hebrew, Aramaic, Old Testament with the Greek New Testament is to use the Septuagint translations from the Old Greek and the Theodotion. The use of the word maskilim in the book of Daniel. The Hebrew word maskilim as used in the book of Daniel describes those who can cause others to consider, teach, and give insight. This word is connected in the book of Daniel with prophetic insight. It appears in the Old Testament outside of the book of Daniel in several contexts. For example, in connection with those who instruct and teach the ways of the Lord, those who diligently seek God, those who behave prudently, and those who are blessed or delivered from trouble, and those who are contrasted with the wicked. Interestingly, the maskilim are also connected with the theme of God's judgment. The word maskilim comes from the root sakal. Sakal appears 19 times in several forms in the book of Daniel. The plural noun form of sakal appears 5 times in the book of Daniel. Daniel 1:4, 11:33, 11:35, 12:3, and 12:10. It is used in Daniel 1, verse 4 to refer to Daniel and his 3 friends. In Daniel 11:33 and 35, it is used to describe the faithful people of God who act until the time of the end. Only in Daniel 12, verses 3 and 10, is the word maskilim found in an end-time context. Finally, the word sakal appears in the book of Daniel in connection with the Hebrew word bin. The Septuagint translation of the word maskilim in the book of Daniel. The Septuagint translates the Hebrew maskilim in the prophecy of Daniel with 2 Greek words, suniemi and noeo. The Greek word suniemi in the New Testament is connected with the understanding of parables, the understanding of figurative or symbolic language, and the understanding of the fulfillment of prophecy. The Greek word noeo in the New Testament is also connected with the understanding of parables, the understanding of figurative or symbolic language, and the understanding of prophetic fulfillment. The characteristics of the end-time maskilim in the book of Daniel. As we stated before, the only texts in the prophecy of Daniel that mention the maskilim in an end-time context are Daniel 12, 3, and 10. There are 4 main characteristics of the maskilim in these 2 verses. The maskilim instruct many in covenant faithfulness. The maskilim will be glorified for eternity. The maskilim will be purified through tribulation, and the maskilim will have prophetic understanding in the time of the end. The maskilim of Daniel 12, verse 3 are said to turn many to righteousness in the time of the end. This complements what we read about the maskilim instructing the masses in Daniel 11:33. There is no doubt that the maskilim have the gift of evangelism. The Hebrew word sadak is a legal term, and it is connected with the idea of judgment. Sadak also appears to be connected with the cleansing, nisdak, of the sanctuary in Daniel 8:14. Daniel 12 verse 4 tells us that many will run to and fro in order to increase prophetic knowledge in the time of the end. This may also be a reference to the prophetic understanding of the masculine. It is interesting to note that Sister White understands the running to and fro of Daniel 12 verse 4 to be connected with the end-time preaching of the gospel. Daniel 12 verse 3 tells us that the masculine will be glorified at the time of the end. These faithful instructors will shine like the brightness of the firmament and like the stars forever and ever. The masculine of Daniel 12 verse 3 most likely include those who will awake to life everlasting in the special resurrection of Daniel 12:2. There are some scholars that believe that the masculine of Daniel 12 verse 3 are also synonymous with those whose names are written in the book and will be delivered by Michael from the great time of trouble of Daniel 12 verse 1. The ones written in the book who will be delivered by Michael may have a thematic link with the holy ones that are delivered from persecution in Daniel 12 verse 7. Daniel 12 verse 10 tells us that the masculine will be purified, made white, and tried. This verse complements what we read about the masculine in Daniel 11:35. The purification of the masculine in Daniel 11:33 and 35 is connected with the idea of persecution. Thus, we can assume that the masculine of Daniel 12 verse 10 will also be purified by the fires of persecution. The end-time purification of the masculine is most likely connected with the cleansing of the sanctuary of Daniel 8:14. Please note that there are some scholars that connect the abomination trial of Daniel 12:11 with the end-time purification of the masculine in Daniel 12 verse 10. Some also connect the eschatological blessing of Daniel 12:12 for those that wait or endure in covenant faithfulness until the end of the 1335 days with the masculine of Daniel 12 verse 10. The idea that the masculine will be a pure group in the eschaton may have a thematic connection with the end-time holy ones of Daniel 12 verse 7. Kodesh Am is used to describe the faithful Israel of God in the Old Testament. The idea of a pure and holy Israel in the time of the end is reflected in the language of the 144,000 of Revelation. Finally, Daniel 12 verse 10 tells us that the masculine will understand the sealed prophecy of Daniel in the time of the end. This is in contrast with the wicked who will not have any prophetic insight. Daniel 12 verse 4 tells us that prophetic knowledge shall be increased in the time of the end. This is probably another reference to the end-time prophetic insight of the masculine. In the book of Daniel, prophetic insight is connected with the presence of the Holy Spirit in the believer. The end-time masculine and the literary structure of Daniel 12. It should be noted that the masculine motif and the literary structure of Daniel 12 are related. Thus, a good understanding of this literary structure is helpful in the interpretation of the text. Samuel Nunez has proposed a chiastic structure for Daniel 12. He sees a parallelism between the end-time events of Daniel 12, 1 and 3, and Daniel 12, 10 to 13. Thus, the masculine of Daniel 12, verse 3 appear to be in parallel with the masculine of Daniel 12, verse 10. Differences between the masculine who lived before and during the time of the end. There are some important differences between the masculine who lived before the time of the end and the masculine who lived during the time of the end. The masculine who lived before the time of the end are purified and persecuted until the time of the end, Daniel 11:35. Whereas the masculine of the end times are purified or persecuted during the time of the end. We find that in Daniel 12, verse 10. The persecution of the masculine in Daniel 11:35 involves, quotes, some, whereas the persecution of the masculine in Daniel 12, verse 10 involves many. There is a specific period of persecution connected with the masculine of the time of the end, whereas there is a 3.5 time period connected with the persecution of the masculine in Daniel 11:33 to 35. There is only a small deliverance for the masculine who lived before the time of the end, as compared to the total and outright deliverance for the masculine who lived during the time of the end. The masculine of Daniel 11:33 to 35 are not immediately resurrected and glorified like their counterparts in Daniel 12, verse 2. Finally, the masculine of Daniel 11:33 to 35 do not have the ability to understand the sealed prophecy of Daniel like their counterparts in the time of the end. Parallelisms between the masculine of Daniel 1 and Daniel 12. Interestingly, scholars have also noted parallels between the themes of Daniel 1 and Daniel 12. Both sections are written in Hebrew. Daniel and his friends are tempted to break their covenant with God by partaking in the unclean food of Nebuchadnezzar. The masculine of Daniel 12 are also tempted to break their covenant with God by worshiping the abomination of the king of the north. Daniel and his friends are tested for 10 days. The wise masculine of Daniel 12 are tested for 1,335 days. Daniel and his friends are vindicated by God. The masculine of Daniel 12 are also vindicated by God. As a result of their faithfulness, Daniel and his friends are found 10 times wiser than their counterparts. Daniel is also given the ability to understand dreams and visions. The masculine of Daniel 12 have the ability to understand the sealed prophecy of Daniel. In Daniel 1:1, Nebuchadnezzar sieges Jerusalem, and God gives Daniel and his masculine friends into his hand. In Daniel 11:45, the king of the north sieges the people of God at the holy mountain, but they will be delivered by Michael. It is interesting to note that several scholars see Daniel and his friends as a prototype of the masculine in the prophetic section of Daniel. Page 7. The influence and use of the Danielic masculine motif in the book of Revelation. Scholars have long noted the importance of the prophecy of Daniel as a background text for the interpretation of the book of Revelation. As we would expect, the book of Revelation alludes to the theme of the end-time masculine from the book of Daniel. There are 16 passages, or at least 16, in the book of Revelation that appear to make a strong linguistic and/or thematic link with the masculine text of Daniel 12, 3, and 10. These passages can be divided into 4 main categories. Number 1, end-time purification. Number 2, end-time wisdom. Number 3, end-time evangelism. And number 4, end-time glorification. We will now examine these 4 themes in greater detail. The end-time purification motif in the book of Revelation. There are 7 passages in the book of Revelation that allude to the purification of the masculine of Daniel 12, verse 10. In Revelation 3, verse 5, we are told that those who overcome will be dressed in white raiments. This alludes to the whitening of the masculine of Daniel 12, verse 10. Furthermore, Revelation 3, verse 5 tells us that the overcomers will not have their names blotted out of the book of life. This appears to allude to the names written in the book of deliverance of Daniel 12, verse 1. In Revelation 3, verse 10, Jesus promises to keep the Philadelphians from the hour of temptation that will try all those living on the earth. This appears to allude to the masculine of Daniel 12, verse 10, who will be purified, made white, and tried during the time of the end. The counsel of the faithful witness to buy gold tried in the fire and white raiment also alludes to the whitening and the trying of the masculine of Daniel 12, verse 10. The counsel to buy eye salves so that the Laodiceans can see also alludes to the masculine who will understand prophecy in the time of the end. In the 5th seal, the martyrs are given a white robe, and they are told to rest until their fellow servants should be killed as they were. This makes an allusion to the persecution and the whitening of the masculine in Daniel 11:35 and 12, verse 10. We are told in Revelation 7, 13 to 14, that the great multitude in white dress has come out of great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. This makes a strong allusion to the whitening of the masculine in Daniel 12, verse 10. In Revelation 14, verses 4 to 5, the 144,000 are also presented as a pure, undefiled group. The 144,000 of Revelation 14, 4, and 5 are most likely synonymous with the great multitude of Revelation 7, 13 to 14. Revelation 19, verse 8 describes the wife of the Lamb as dressed in fine linen, clean and white. This fine linen alludes to the masculine who will be purified, made white, and tried in the time of the end. Finally, Revelation 22:11 describes a group who will be righteous and holy for eternity, and another group who will be wicked and filthy for eternity. This verse makes a strong allusion to the wise and the wicked of Daniel 12, verse 10. The end-time wisdom motif in the book of Revelation. There are 6 passages in the book of Revelation that allude to the end-time wisdom of the masculine in Daniel 12, verse 10. In Revelation 1, verse 3, a benediction is pronounced on those who understand and obey the prophecy of Revelation in the time of the end. This call to wisdom alludes to the end-time masculine of Daniel 12, verse 10, who will understand the sealed prophecy in the time of the end. Please note that if you see the reference to the eye salve that allows the Laodiceans to see in Revelation 3:18 as an allusion to the wisdom of Daniel 12, verse 10. In Revelation 10:10, The prophet John is instructed to take the little open book out of the hand of the angel and eat it. This prophetic action refers to God's end-time people. The little open book symbolizes the unsealed prophecy of Daniel at the time of the end. Thus, the people of God living in the last days are instructed to eat and prophesy the unsealed contents of the book of Daniel. The eating of the little book signifies the internalization and comprehension of the prophetic message. In essence, you become one of the wise masculine of Daniel 12, verses 4 and 10, when you eat and understand the contents of the little book of Revelation, chapter 10. In Revelation 13:9, we have a call to understand the cryptic prophecy of Revelation 13:1-8. This call to wisdom uses the hearing formula from the Gospels, and it alludes to the end-time prophetic insight of the masculine of Daniel 12, verse 10. In Revelation 13:18 and 17, verse 9, there are two calls to wisdom that are very similar. Both call for wisdom and a mind to understand end-time prophetic fulfillment. These two texts allude to the prophetic understanding of the masculine of Daniel 12, verse 10. It is interesting to note that the abomination warning of the Olivet Discourse also makes a strong allusion to the end-time wisdom of the masculine from Daniel 12, verse 10. This appears to create a thematic connection between the calls to wisdom in Revelation and the abomination warning of the Olivet Discourse. Finally, in Revelation 19, verse 10, we are told that John's brethren have the testimony of Jesus, which is defined as the spirit of prophecy. This appears to be another allusion to the masculine of Daniel 12, verse 10, who will increase in knowledge and understand prophecy in the time of the end. The end-time evangelism motif in the book of Revelation. There are three passages in the book of Revelation that allude to the evangelistic nature of the masculine of Daniel 12, verse 3. After eating the little open book of Revelation 10, verses 8-10, John is told that he must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. In this passage, John represents God's end-time people that will understand the unsealed prophecy of Daniel and preach this message to all the inhabitants of the earth. This verse alludes to the evangelistic nature of the end-time masculine of Daniel 12, verse 3. In a related passage, John sees an angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, to every nation and kindred and tongue and people. This angelic being symbolizes the end-time people of God that will preach the eternal gospel to all the inhabitants of the earth. This verse also alludes to the evangelistic nature of the end-time masculine of Daniel 12, verse 3. Interestingly, most SDA scholars connect the first angel's message of Revelation 14, 6-7 with the mission and the message of the 144,000. Finally, in Revelation 22:11, we are told that he that is righteous, let him be righteous still. He that is holy, let him be holy still. This verse alludes to those who are turned to righteousness by the end-time masculine in Daniel 12, verse 3. The end-time glorification motif in the book of Revelation. There are two passages in the book of Revelation that allude to the glorification of the masculine in Daniel 12, verse 3. Revelation 1, 16 and 20 identify the seven stars in the right hand of Jesus as the seven angels of the seven churches. These angels appear to be a symbol for the human leadership of the seven churches. These saintly stars appear to allude to the masculine of Daniel 12, verse 3, who will shine as the stars forever and ever. In Revelation 19, verse 8, the wife of the Lamb is dressed in fine linen, clean and white. This appears to allude to the masculine of Daniel 12, verse 3, who shall shine as the brightness of the firmament forever and ever. The fine linen of the saints is also described as the righteousness of the saints. This is another key word that may allude to the end-time masculine of Daniel 12, verse 3, that turn many to righteousness.
Thank you so much, Brother Hugo. It's a slightly different take, not looking at the kingdom north or south, but the characteristics of God's end-time people. I'll just take a couple of comments, because lunch